Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Okay. And you can see my screen. Okay. I will get started. Thank you, Ahu, for the introduction, and I apologize for not being there in person. I know these talks over Zoom can be uh, boring because you're sitting there looking at this screen, and it's morning. So I'm not going to bore you with slides. I'm just going to mostly talk about some of the work we've been doing and talk about some of the lessons we've learned really. And I mean, it's sort of it's interesting, right? Everything is AI now, so that's great for people like me who've been doing it for a long time. It's also really frustrating for people like me who've been doing it for a very long time because you everybody now is an expert, and so you have to really figure out what they know, what they don't know, and how to help them move forward. And so, what I want to talk through today is really, I'm not going to talk about the current state, right? The current state is at some level really promising, at other levels it's a disaster, right? The hype, since all of you are also are doing AI, because why else would you be there? Why else would you be anywhere if you're not doing AI? It's great for you all, right? Because you have infinite budgets now to do everything. You're getting. Just kidding, in case it wasn't obvious. Um, AI is going to fix all of our problems. It's going to fix poverty. That was one of the ones I saw recently because poverty is just an engineering problem, and AI can fix all engineering problems. Um, but I think more practically, what I'm sort of as a result of all the hype, and you all are in the middle of that. What I'm seeing is repeated pressure on all organizations, not just in industry and the private sector, and for you all, where you're supposed to do AI. It doesn't matter what the use case is. It doesn't matter if you're ready. It doesn't matter if you know what that means. But you're supposed to do AI. You're supposed to check the AI box. Companies, reasonable companies, are turning their mission statements into we're an AI first company, which doesn't mean anything. Um, it's also pretty scary for what I'm sort of seeing from a lot of people in the industry is a lot of performance evaluations for people are using ridiculous things like number of times you use an AI tool. And every time they use internal provided tools, it gets counted and logged. And end of the quarter when they're having a review, they're like, you only use this 4 times a day. You need to use it more. So otherwise you're gonna get fired. Um, and so that hype is it's hype, but in practice it's affecting you all in terms of being pushed in some ways away from mission and into this shiny new object, right? At the same time, we're sort of seeing problems. Some of them, again, we can talk about why those problems are happening and how much of those problems are about the AI technology versus everything else around it. So, this was I was reading a few days ago. That was a facial recognition problem of and an old woman was arrested and held for several months in a fraud case, and when it could have been cleared pretty quickly if people had just followed the regular investigation process, because there was evidence she never even was physically in. That's sort of a higher intensity issue, but there's sort of less intense things like AI tools are making up locations people are going to. They're trying to buy tickets for places that don't exist. Um, and then if you go to the AI fails subreddit, you'll see hundreds of posts a day talking about things, obviously simple things that the system is getting wrong. And you all have experienced it, right? You've tried to use these tools and you sort of find then that they're useful, but they're also um, silly at times. And when they work and when they don't work is unpredictable. You can't tell before you try it. Um, and so it works out really well if you're an expert on something and you're using it so you can verify everything and take the time. But if you don't know the answer to a question and you're trying to ask it, you can't necessarily trust it without spending um, a lot of time. And so this, there is kind of these headlines of both positives and negatives, but then on the ground, the impact, the actual societal and people impact hasn't really happened yet, other than the jobs loss. But again, a lot of people are sort of saying the jobs loss was going to happen anyway. People were going to be laid off, and AI is giving companies a good excuse. But on the ground, what I'm seeing is a lot of projects start, but they don't continue. A lot of pilots happen, prototypes happen, but they're rarely put into production at scale. And then a lot of lawsuits coming up against the use of AI tools, whether they're in hiring and employment, or in all the content creation and review type cases, right? So, and so it's the tangible demonstrated impact of these tools. We're not really seeing that in the near term, and there are a lot of reasons why, and these are not all of them, right? It's the big reason is really that people are sort of doing things AI first, where the rest of the infrastructure doesn't exist. You're not ready for it. You don't have the data. You don't have governance. You don't have the buy-in of the people using it. You don't know what you're trying to do, what the goal is, what the values you're trying to achieve are, um, and and that sort of ends up becoming a disaster, right? Um, but I don't want to talk about the extremes, right? That's like we kind of understand the extremes right now, and I want to sort of talk about this middle ground, right? Which is where I think real impact is going to live. It's not going to be AI saving everything. It's not going to be AI. It will be a total disaster. If AI was useless and a total disaster, we would just stop doing it. At least in cases that where we care about people and care about impact. Um, and so we know we can improve things. Um, and as I was sort of saying, we have to kind of improve things responsibly. Now, I don't know what responsibly means. There are a bunch of these buzzwords that have come up, and I run an initiative at Carnegie Mellon for responsible AI, but we don't really know what it means, because it is at this point a buzzword. And so what I want to sort of talk through is sort of talk about, what does this middle ground look like? How do we do it well? How do we do it when it has the impact that we want to have? Because you can have all sorts of undesired impacts, right? And so I'll give you a couple of examples of projects that are going on right now in our team, and then use that to ground some of the lessons we've learned over the last few years, because a lot of these a lot of these extremes we're seeing aren't just about AI. They've been about a lot of these types of technologies that are using data and evidence to help people make decisions, whether it's machine learning, whether it's data science, all of those things. And and so I want to give you a couple of examples of sort of recent ongoing projects. And so one project that's going on right now in where I'm based in Pittsburgh in Allegheny County is with the Human Services Agency, which is around homelessness prevention. And this is specifically focused on a very narrow decision point, which is when somebody is facing an eviction. You're renting a place that, for whatever reason, the landlord has filed an eviction. You're in an eviction case. Um, there is rental assistance money that is available to help you pay your rent, and you have to apply for it. And the typical way that money gets allocated is there are a bunch of eligibility criteria. If you meet those criteria, it is first come, first serve. You call, there's a phone number, or you show up in this one particular office and you fill out an application. If you call early in the month, when there's money left, you get the money if you're eligible. If you call later, the money's run out for the month. Too bad. You have to apply again next month, and keep hoping that you get the resources you need that are available, that you're eligible for. That is not unlike a lot of other benefit programs we have, where it's up to the person who needs the help to figure out how to get the help, how to fill out the forms, where to go, what to do. Um, and people who have more resources, people who have understand the system, are get that before people who may not. And so what ends up happening is that a lot of people who need this don't get in time, and end up homeless. So what the county wanted to do was to figure out, can we use this rental assistance money as a tool to prevent homelessness? Um, Not just to stabilize somebody, but to make sure that to prioritize people who are become homeless, and to focus this money on the most vulnerable. The challenge was that this first come first served model doesn't work when you're trying to prevent homelessness. And so what we worked with them on was use the data that's been collected, and that was sort of a big part of why this project worked. Was we had already a large investment in the data infrastructure that was linked across all the county data, across all the human services, all the benefits they're getting, courts data, eviction data, homeless HMIS data, connected that with employment data from the state, UI data a lot of you are familiar with, um, and 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 use that to initially build a machine learning system that identifies of the people facing eviction, who are the ones most likely to become homelessness, to be in need of a home of homelessness services over the near future. Um, that was part one, right? And that's useful if all you want to know is who's going to become homeless. But that is not the point of this. That's the point is not to build an AI system that predicts homelessness. We've seen a lot of these types of things built, and they don't do anything because prediction is a small part of the problem, right? Now, what I can do, if my model is really good, is watch these people become homeless. Um, that's not very useful to anyone. And so the second piece was trying to figure out what are the intervention points, right? What are the things that you can do? And in this case, the primary intervention point was offer them rental assistance. And so that system was designed. So what it does now is every week it generates this list of people who are high risk of becoming homeless that are currently facing an eviction, and it generates this list and splits those lists into the warmest touch that we have for this each person, right? So if they have interacted with supportive housing before, if they've interacted with child welfare system, interacted with if they're going to be in court, there's a team over there. And if we haven't had any interaction with them recently, it goes to this outreach team. That is the team that also does the intake for all the other rental assistance applications. And so they're used to this process. They get this outreach list, they call them and they tell them about the rental assistance program and help them start an application. So that's part number two, right? There is identifying people who might need the help. There is coming up with a program and a system that does the outreach. Now the step three is to try to figure out, well, does it actually work? Not whether this model is accurate at predicting homelessness, not whether people use it and like it. Those two things are nice, but that's not impact. Accuracy for a model is about the model. The outreach team liking the model, using the system is nice, but again, we want to sort of see, does this combined system, does this AI system plus this human outreach um, to offer rental assistance result in reduction in homelessness? And if it does, who does it work well for and who does it leave behind? And so for the last, it's a 16 months, we've been running a randomized control trial in the county where we generate this list and we randomize the list, and we do outreach. And what we are fine. So right now we still have another 6-ish months to go to get more conclusive results, but the early results are showing su surprisingly large reductions in homelessness as a result of this outreach attempts. So we're finding that we are actually reducing homelessness because of this combined system, and this reduction is primarily focused on people who are the highest risk of becoming homeless. So that's also great because what often happens is people who are the highest risk at one of these things are also the hardest to change, that you need high intensity expensive interventions, and this is relatively light touch. It's a phone call to start this process to kind of get to them. The biggest gap is really reachability, and again, if you've done any of this work, you know getting to the people that having the right contact information is the hardest part, and that's part of the larger system, right? So that's kind of example number one. Example number two is very similar in a very different domain. This is work in Kansas we're doing with a couple of counties, Johnson and Douglas. Um, and this is initially started off very much as how do we prioritize mental health outreach to people who are at risk of getting booked into jail again. And we built the system and ran a trial again for a few years and showed reductions in jail booking rates as a result of targeted mental health outreach. And that system was deployed, and they wanted to kind of expand that to focus on reducing the impact of behavioral and mental health crises, suicides, overdose. Um, and again, the idea was a lot of the times these teams that exist to help people, they're reactive. They wait until they get a referral. The referral might be from 911, they might be from police, they might be from emergency department, from a hospital. And at that point, their job is to sort of stabilize the situation. That they can't prevent too much of what's already happened. And so they came up with the same question is, can you help us figure out how do we be proactive with outreach resources that we have to provide people with mental health services that can reduce the impact of their crises. And in that case, what was sort of a challenge here is, again, a standard AI machine learning system. Maybe, hey, let's predict who's going to be at risk. And again, that's useful. But as you start thinking about integrating into the workflow of the team that's doing the outreach, and you start talking to them about what they're doing, their decision points aren't as simple as give me a list and I'll deal with it. Their decision points are, tell me who's going to need my help in the near future. Tell me the intensity of their problem. Is it going to be something that's more intense? Is it a suicide attempt? Is it self-harm? Is it something less intense? Tell me the urgency of that. Is this going to be the next few days, the next few weeks, the next few months? So I can figure out how to prioritize them based on this anticipated intensity and urgency. And then tell me what the workload is going to be to my caseworkers, if I assign them this person, because you want to load balance. You have a team of 15 people. You can't give the same person all the high intensity people. Um, Tell me, how reachable are they? And so it's not just about spitting out these risk scores that a lot of these systems do. It's about supporting the process, supporting the workflow by giving them all of these different pieces. Um, and so that's the system we've been building for them. And that's soon kind of going to start getting into the same randomized controlled trial phase, to test, does this system, does the AI system plus the outreach team combine reduce the impact of these types of crises. So stepping back from these examples, um, I want to sort of talk through some of the lessons we've learned by doing 100 plus of these types of projects over the last, let's say, 10 years, 15 years. And and what's different, what's going on sort of in this space, in the AI space, that's different is, that doesn't get talked about very much, is in all of these cases, we don't have a one size fits all system that we just buy. We don't just pay OpenAI $50 a month for a license and say problem solved, right? Or take an open source tool, install it, and be done with it. These systems are, I'd say, unfortunately, right, not one size fits all. It requires a lot of custom design and and tweaking based on the decision point. So the system that a lot of times you're going to see, oh, we have a system that predicts homelessness. Well, there is no such system that predicts homelessness. The system that we built was very much designed to take people who are facing an eviction and are going to be in the top 30 people every week who are likely to be homeless in the next 1 year, because that was the resource capacity of the team that was going to do outreach. If their capacity was 300 people, it would be a different system. If the capacity was 20, it would be a different system. If the intervention was not an outreach phone call for rental assistance, it would be a different system. If the pool of people incoming, the eligibility criteria wasn't facing an eviction, but it was any human service recipient, that would be a different system. Now that should alarm you, because that's a lot of work to build these different systems. Um, but it turns out if you set them up right, it's not a lot of extra work, but it is a lot of deliberate, thoughtful design work up front, where you have to figure out the process, you have to map out the decision points, and then the changes in the technical system are really small, but they're significant. Um, and so one thing to kind of keep in mind as you all sort of incorporate AI into different workflows and processes, it is not one size fits all, despite what you're hearing from the large companies, right? OpenAI and just the name of, and when you sort of see GPT, right? General Purpose Transformer. It is it is general purpose and it's not. So just for those of you, one level deeper detail is ChatGPT is not a general purpose system. ChatGPT is based on this underlying model called GPT, right, which is general purpose. It's called general purpose. But what happens is that it doesn't know anything about chat interactions. And so that's the system underlying that's been trained on all the data that existed in the world. But then on top of that, to create ChatGPT, OpenAI um, hired a bunch of people to have chat interactions with this system. And that training on top of it is what made the system be a chat bot. It wasn't, GPT doesn't know anything about chat, about interactions. It just spits out words. And so there's a custom piece that happened that is not trivial and it's not cheap. And it's always ongoing, right? And so that's something to keep in mind. The second piece is just for setting to the baseline expectations, right? Is a lot of these AI systems, they generally do what you tell them to do, which is reassuring because if we tell them the right thing, they're likely to do the right thing. The problem is telling them what to do is not how to tell them what to do isn't always obvious. We can tell them in lots of different ways, and they're not very easily auditable or exposable. You tell them what to do by the data you give them. But that's not the only way. You can override the data. You tell them what to do by saying, look, when you try to do something with this data, you're going to make mistakes. Each mistake is going to be worth a different cost, and each correct thing you do is going to be worth a different reward. And so you define this reward system and the cost penalty system. And generally, those are the two ways you tell the system what to do. But both of those two ways are decisions that are being made by technical people, developers, that aren't thinking of them as um, belonging to the domain or belonging to the value system or the policy. They're thinking about it as, oh, it's just a technical choice. We're going to pick something. Just treat every mistake equally. Doesn't really matter. Well, that's then what causes a lot of these bias issues is because they're saying, well, it doesn't matter what you get wrong. It's equal. So if your data is majority of one type, you want to make sure you get the majority right because every mistake, because the developer told you every mistake is going to be equally penalized. So let's make fewer mistakes, which means get things right for the majority, right? A lot of these things make sense once you start understanding what's going on underneath. The second thing is, and this is becoming much more common with the new generative AI tools, is they do what you tell them to do, but they don't necessarily do what you meant them to do. We aren't great at being explicit and detailed and at defining specs. And a couple of weeks ago, I was at a workshop where talking to a lot of people who are building software at large companies, and a lot of them sort of said, "Well, I haven't looked at code in months. I tell Claude Code what I want to generate. It generates it. I then tell it to generate test cases, and so it generates test cases. It checks itself, and we ship it out." That's scary, right? Because that's assuming that we are really, really, really good at telling our needs explicitly in a spec way that the system can do, and that's not true. We've always had trouble doing that. That scoping and discovery piece is often the hardest piece of a project, where you need iterations, you need back and forth, you need different viewpoints, um, and so I think those two things kind of um, as the backdrop, want to kind of go into some ways to deal with those issues, right? How do we get the impact we need to have while dealing with the technology constraints that we have? So the biggest thing that I have sort of and a lot of these things are going to be obvious. You know them, but your bosses are ignoring them. And so hopefully this is more uh, uh, reassuring for you and gives you more things to go back and say, see, I was telling you this. It's not just us; it's everybody else who's saying the same thing, and I'm hearing these things repeatedly, right? And so we all want to be data driven. It's wonderful to be data driven, and data is great, and but data is bad. Data is always bad. It doesn't matter. I shouldn't be saying it at this event because but again, it's not. We're not here because of data. We're here because of impact, and data is a good tool to get to impact. It's a better tool than a lot of other tools we've seen, but it is a tool. And so instead of being kind of data driven, right, we kind of have to be action and intervention driven. And what I mean with that is, again, this is something I say a lot is, and some of you are going to get a little upset by that. Like, you've all built dashboards, probably, or have teams that built dashboards. They're useless, right? Because unless there's an action, well, there's one use. They stop your boss from asking about how are we doing, right? So you're sort of minimizing that overhead for yourself, but the actual impact is pretty minimal because most people don't take actions based on dashboards. You look at them, you admire them, they look cool, they look pretty. Um, but what is the action that this tool that you're trying to build, the AI tool, what is the action it's informing? What's the decision it's supporting? Right. So in the homelessness case, it's not building a big dashboard that's telling you who's going to be homeless. Um, and it's the actual action is we're giving a list to this person who is making a phone call. And so that action is literally in a spreadsheet. Where the output is a spreadsheet um, where there's this phone number and history of this person. It's supporting the outreach worker to call and offer them rental assistance. It's helping them look up their prior information, check for eligibility, check if anything is in process. And so the action is this outreach for rental assistance. It's not rental assistance, and it's not um, a dashboard. It is outreach. And same in the mental health case. In other cases, it might be connection to an assistance program. It might be an after school program. In other projects we've done, there's a project we did many years ago around lead poisoning. It's like 10, 12 years ago in Chicago. And the action there was a lead hazard inspection. Uh, the 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 idea was to prevent lead poisoning in children, but you can't just prevent lead poisoning in children by doing something to the child. The because the source is lead in the house, you have to remove that lead source, and to find out if there is lead, you need to do an inspection. So that was the action. And so very much from the very beginning, when working on a project, we sort of start identifying what are the actions you're going to change. If you don't have an action, don't do AI. It's not worth it. It's too expensive, too much work, waste of time. Start figuring out the intervention, the policies. And the good thing is a lot of us, a lot of you all in different agencies have programs and policies and interventions in place. And so start a project around that intervention. Say this intervention exists. It's not given to the right people. It's too late. Um, it's not allocated correctly. Can AI help me improve its allocation so that I can have better impact? Right? Number two, again, you all are here, which means you like metrics. If you like data, you like metrics, right? And metrics are wonderful. Um, but metrics we all know can also be misleading, right? And it takes and people can be if metrics are not the right metrics, people get uh, start optimizing for the metrics. And we've all seen sort of the volume metrics, right? Like we sort of see um, I again I work on homelessness a lot, and so I'll hear metrics like we have 90% bed utilization in our homeless shelter. Well, that's I don't know if that's good or bad. Uh, I can just send more. You can just go and recruit more people to come into your homeless shelter, and you increase that number, or you just reduce the beds. Just put one bed there, and then you'll have 100% utilization if that's the metric. Or we had 600 people go through our programs. That's great, but how many of them needed that program? And how many did you miss who actually needed it? How did you misallocate? Or I see education programs saying, high school support programs saying 99% of our people who go through our program go to college. Well, that's great, but how many would have gone to college otherwise? Maybe all of them would have gone to college, and you actually hurt their chances. Not always, not necessarily true. I'm often exaggerating to kind of make that point, but we often measure what's easy to measure, um, and and it's harder to measure the long-term counterfactual. It's harder to measure what would have happened if the system didn't exist. But that's what we're trying to get to. And so in the case of kind of the homelessness example, right, is what we're trying to measure is reduction in homelessness. Um, but most of these AI systems are going to tell you accuracy of the model. Um, and so for each AI model that exists, there are benchmarks that they're tested on. Each benchmark comes with certain metrics. And a lot of the times when organizations today are making procurement decisions, they're looking at these benchmarks and think, oh, this model is the best, and so you should use that. Well, it's the best at accuracy. It's not the so you need it to be accurate, but it's kind of there's no point if it's not usable, right? So you kind of want to go through this flow and say how good in the case of the homelessness rental assistant example I was giving, we initially measured how well can this system identify future homelessness. Step number two was um, the users in the middle, the people who are doing the outreach, when they get input from the system, output from the system, um, what happens to them? Do they use it? Do they agree with it? Do they disagree with it? Does it help them reach the right people? That's okay. That's great. Number three is the combined thing, the better identification of homelessness plus better use of this system by the outreach workers. Does that lead to reduction in homelessness? And if that was your only goal, you can have your metric of reduction in homelessness, right? But that's not always the only goal. The other goals might be you might have disparities in homelessness across different types of people. Um, does this system reduce that disparity? And you can sort of hand wave and talk about it, or you can put it as a metric, which is you can define the disparity between groups and say that's my primary metric. I don't care about overall reduction. I care about reducing the disparity because the system that reduces disparity may be a very different system to design than the system that reduces overall homelessness rates, and it depends on your policy need. um, and so defining the right metrics, um, even if you can't get to them tomorrow, means that you kind of keep, you kind of have this longer term metric and a near term and a medium term, and so you have a flow of at different stages. But because if you just focus on the immediate one, you forget the larger, the longer term real goals. Even though it's always in our, we talk about efficiency as a goal, but efficiency by itself can lead to inequity. So kind of thinking about it's not just about allocating resource to people who need it, but it's also about allocating resource to people for whom you can change the outcome. Maybe you can identify people who are going to become homeless, but maybe this intervention isn't useful for those people. So it doesn't change homelessness. Um, or it's useful, but it's only useful for people who understand the system, um, and know how to do all these things and have access to the resources. In which case, it increases inequity. So we kind of have to build those outcomes in as metrics. This is something that's becoming much more common than it used to be because AI tools are getting cheaper to at least play with, right? Again, as I said, you can play with ChatGPT for free, or you can pay 30-50 bucks a month if you're an agency, and check the AI box. Right? And have a press release. So the mayor or the county manager or the governor can have a press release that says we are the first in the nation to do X with AI, and it'll probably be true. We're the first in the nation to do this because again, you're all trying to do new things now, and the playing is fine. It builds comfort. It builds familiarity. Um, but that doesn't mean it's the same as evaluation. Um, at least in my experience, as I've worked with different states, I'm seeing very little true evaluation. And for me, what I'm sort of my hypothesis is that you know governors' attention spans are short, right? And so once the press release comes out, the buy-in kind of goes away, or the attention and goes away. So once you've kind of done the initial pilot prototype, um, and say, hey, we're playing with this, you need then a larger investment to actually make sure that you run a rigorous evaluation, that you show the impact on productivity, on human outcomes, on the people who live there, and on the services you provide. And that requires much, much, much more work and effort and investment and infrastructure. And people have sort of lost interest because the press release has already happened. And I think that's where we need to really push for is not rely on some of these early, so I'll give you an example. I think I won't name the governor or the state, but there was a state that was doing a pilot with OpenAI. And what they did was they got a bunch of licenses, about 150 licenses of ChatGPT. They asked people who would be interested in using them. They gave it to people. They let them use for a few months. And then they did a survey. And the survey said, did you use it? Did you like it? Um, and did you think it saved you time? And guess what? 80 something, there was a press release that says, 88% of the people who were given this said they liked it. And they saved an average of 6 hours a week or something like that. Success. Problem solved. AI is helping the state deliver better services through responsible design and all the buzzwords, right? There's zero evidence of that. But worse, there's no follow through on that. That was the end. Um, and so those can be good starting points, but those cannot be ending points. And the question is, how do we as the people in the middle who are often running these types of uh, pilots set them up right, um, so that the metrics are not, how did you feel about this? The metrics are more about what impact did it have? And if you don't have in 3 months the impact numbers, then the pilot is not done. Um, and so you kind of have to build it into that from the very beginning, when that attention is still there. Um, this is obvious, you all are here because you care about integrating the data from different sources. Um, and AI isn't gonna take away that problem. It can help. That's one of the more promising use cases, is how can we do better data integration? But it's not just about integrating data. So the example I was giving again on both the mental health, behavioral health side, as well as the homelessness side, as well as most of our projects, the big reason that they end up working and having impact is because those cities and counties and states did the upfront work of investing in a linked data infrastructure. Uh, you can't really solve any problem by just looking at administrative data from that one source. Uh, at a minimum, in order to evaluate, you want to you need data from other sources. If you're trying to figure out, you know, if you're trying to prevent homelessness, you might not uh, necessarily have information on people about their other services that they're getting. You want to look at, are they consuming more or less mental health services? You want to look at criminal justice outcomes. You want to look at education outcomes. You want to look at, SNAP and TANF. You want to look at, if they're getting other services. You want to try to integrate their other, emergency medical response, medical services data. And so in every single project that we've done over the past 15 years, without that linked data infrastructure, you couldn't have built the system and you couldn't have evaluated. In fact, actually, in some of these cases, these projects were iterative projects where the first iteration, we find that we can't really do much with the data we have. And that gives the agencies the incentive and the mandate numbers to go back and say, we need to build more data agreements with our other agencies in the region or across county and state boundaries, to collect that data, to connect that data and bring that back in, and that's what shows us improvements, right? So I think with the new AI tools, even when these tools are really helpful in building things for you, where you don't necessarily need data to build something, the burden is all pushed off to evaluation. You still need to evaluate using data, whether you're building, you can, let's say you're trying to figure out who's gonna need unemployment insurance in my state in the next 6 months. You might be able to ask ChatGPT that question, um, given some data, but you still need to evaluate whether the answer is correct or not. And so a lot of the work that's going to happen is really much more on the evaluation side. Even if we think that building these systems has become easier, writing the code has become easier, data integration has become easier, the evaluation hasn't gotten any easier, and it still requires a good data infrastructure to be able to do that. But it also requires a lot of these things as you connect them to services, requires your service channels to be connected, right? Anything you're doing online, you're doing offline, you're doing phone, in person, they all need to be connected, and they often live in silos just like data does. Um, and so connecting these different, again, the example that I was giving on the homelessness side, it's not just this one outreach team making phone calls. It's the person with the team with the most recent contact with the person we're trying to reach, um, to get them to be the most familiar. It's trying to figure out which is the right channel. Another project we were doing in Pennsylvania was around identifying people who are eligible for SNAP benefits but are not enrolled, and then trying to do outreach again to connect them. And that's again where outreach, who does the outreach and how the outreach is done, is is as important, not more important, than who it's being done to. Right? Identification is a problem of who is eligible, not enrolled, but getting to them and persuading them uh, is, and then helping them go through that process is equally important, if not more important. Um, yeah, this should also be obvious, right? It's often, again, the way we think about ChatGPT and Claude, and depends on what you're using. If you're using the chatbot version, right, it's sort of a sitting on the side. Like you go out of your workflow to do something, you then copy and paste it back. Uh, and 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 a lot of these companies have learned, and they're embedding these into the workflow, not necessarily, that well, but whether it's Google Slides or PowerPoint, things like that. What is the equivalent for, again, for us? It's embedding these tools into the workflow so people don't go out of their way. If you're doing inspections, it's just the same inspection tool and the same layout and the same formatting. It's just the back end is now powered by this, by a system that prioritizes based on need or risk. If you're doing, again, this outreach for mental assistance, if you're doing outreach for mental health, um, you still get the same type of things, instead of just getting historical data about somebody. You're sort of saying, and this person is going to likely to face a high intensity mental health, high severity mental health event within the next week. They'll have a medium workload, caseload, and they are reachable best through in-person, outreach. That's their existing workflow. We've just kind of made a tiny tweak where it's now supported. The back end is now being populated by an AI tool instead of a manual human. But that's the way to kind of make sure that people actually use it. Otherwise, it's a tool sitting on the side that we've all seen nobody uses. The part that's often harder is embedding talent, right? Because again, some of you are probably from IT teams and data teams. Some of you are from policy and program teams, and there's always this tension of where, every policy program team wants to kind of own their own data people and IT people, um, and a lot of organizations want to centralize that because it makes more sense from an efficiency point of view, and it's tricky because both models have worked. Um, but you kind of ideally want the data and IT people to understand the programs and the policies. There are too many government agencies where you have the IT and data teams that have no clue about the program they're supporting and the policy programs and the interventions. And so they don't understand how the data is generated. They don't understand that. They're just like, it's just a database. I'm just doing linkage and I'm giving it to you. Don't ask me about anything else. And that is usually a disaster because that lack of context, really hurts the overall program. But each program can't always have their own people, and so some places have sort of centralized but have dedicated, um, liaisons. Some programs have kind of have people where You have people spread out, but they also have a virtual uh, connection, so they have a support group and they have a community as opposed to being separated. But I think having the data analytics, AI, machine learning people that understand the problems, the policy problems, and has, in my experience, have worked so much better. Um, because once they start understanding them, they become, actual, they become better participants in the whole process. They're better stakeholders as opposed to I'm just controlling the server and the data. I don't really care what you do with it. Okay, maybe. Well, okay, so I'm just gonna skip this first, but um, sometimes I sort of see over reliance on data when you don't have the right data. Um, and so knowing what the data has and what the data doesn't have, right? Um, and and you only have the data that you collect, right? Whether it's administrative or survey. If you didn't provide a service to somebody, you can't assume that they didn't need that service. And we know that this happened a lot during COVID, where um, in many ways, it's kind of bubbled up a lot. We've always known these things. People who work on surveys know everything about sort of responding bias and respond bias and sample bias, but in COVID, it kind of came out very obviously, where people were sort of seeing COVID rates, right? Like what's the prevalence, and those numbers were based on people who were being tested, not actual COVID prevalence rates. And so that was often biased because older people were more symptomatic, so they were getting tested more often. Older people were higher risk, so they were getting tested more often. So communities with more younger people, even though they might have had a higher prevalence, we wouldn't know that because they weren't being tested. Well, that's obvious. Take again, a lot of you probably work with unemployment data. Um, During COVID, UI data was being considered as almost ground truth for who was actually unemployed. We know that this is only for the formal job sector. It's only W-2, and it misses, self-employed and small businesses. But a lot of states were kind of the people running these systems knew that, but the decisions that were being made at kind of the governor's office level were ignoring that, and we're kind of looking at state unemployment from the lens of this UI data because that's what we have. That's easily accessible. Every state has it. It's in a accessible format, and so you can just sort of say, "Well, tell me how many people are unemployed," and do all sorts of resource allocation around it. But that was disproportionately missing certain types of people who needed more support. And so knowing the limits of the data is as important as sort of using data. Um, and this happens in many other contexts. I many years ago, I used to do political things, and one of the things that happens in a lot of political data is the most important day is election day, right? And one of the challenges with election data is you don't know on election day voting what time somebody voted. You don't get that data. You get somebody voted on this day, but you don't know what time they voted. So if it's 4 p.m. and your predictions were you had these people that were supposed to vote and they haven't voted yet, do you panic and say, "Shit, all my things are wrong. We're gonna lose," or do you wait because maybe they're gonna vote at the end of the day because that's when they normally vote, but you don't have, because your data doesn't have the timestamp, you don't know that information, so you can't use it to figure out how are we doing so far. And so using that data to calm people and saying we don't know this, um, there's no conclusion, there's no information, it's not good or bad, it's just what is. um, those are the type of things that people who have kind of deep understanding of the limits of their data, they, they're able to do, right? Governance, we've kind of already talked a lot about some of these things, right? It's not about the model, but it's the system, and the system is often the entire workflow. And so when we're putting in governance in place, we often sort of over focus on the AI governance piece, whereas this overall system governance is what we care about. And the examples that I wanted to remind myself to give is, again, this lead poisoning case, the project we were doing. the AI model predicted kids who were gonna homes that have kids that were at risk of lead poisoning. That was then given to a set of people who would make phone calls to do outreach to get to schedule a lead hazard inspection. And one of the things was those inspections, turns out that it was only getting inspections in certain areas. And so when we dug into it, turns out those calls were being made in English. And so obviously when somebody who picks up the phone doesn't speak English, they weren't scheduling those inspections. And so the model was not the problem. The outreach medium was the problem, and kind of governance on the whole thing was able to identify the gap and then fix that. And so that's kind of important, is not just limiting it to AI because you lose sort of the overall thing. Um, the another piece, sort of, I'm going to go through some of these quickly because they're not that deep. uh, um, we often look for sort of, in these types of things, compare them to perfection versus status quo. So one of the nice things about AI is, if you're going to compare it to status quo, then you have to baseline your status quo. You have to kind of do the work of saying, how well are we doing today at this? Measure that, put it in place, and then measure lift. It seems obvious, but that's kind of where I get a lot of, when I talk to people in criminal justice. I sort of hear a lot of skepticism around AI, and some of it rightly. Um, my usual question there is, well, tell me, how well do your judges do today? Like, what how are they doing? And they look at me like, what do you mean, how are they doing? Like, well, what's your success metric for your judges? What's their performance metric? And let's compare the AI system on the same metric. And as you all know, I mean, that we don't have those. We don't evaluate uh, a lot of those existing human processes. And that's not to say we shouldn't evaluate AI. We should definitely evaluate AI, but I think we need to put evaluation metrics on the overall process, because then we can baseline it and then say, okay, if you insert AI in the middle, does it improve, or does it degrade the overall process? This is another thing that I see more and more often, is whenever sort of risks of AI come up, the checkbox that companies, vendors often offer is, oh, don't worry, there's a human in the loop, and that means it's fine. And that's basically the safety check of, this system is safe to use because there's a human in the loop. The human in the loop is important and can be useful, but there have been several studies that have shown the human in the loop can be worse than just the human and just the AI system. And so inserting a human in front of an AI system can be worse. Um, and so that's something to keep in mind as you start. And it's because the human is not trained or used to being in the loop. The human, if it's the same human that used to do that job, they're used to doing it. They're not used to being in the loop. And so um, this is something that, the consumer example of this, people complain about all the time, is self-driving cars. If you're sitting there in the driver's seat and human in the loop, if the car all of a sudden decides that it needs your help, and you're napping, you have, a microsecond, a millisecond, or second to react. You're not ready for that. You're not trained for that. You don't have the tools for that. And so it needs to give you enough heads up, enough early warning, and tell you what to do. And so you have to kind of change the process if the human in the loop has to work. Um, and there have been repeated examples where we've done experiments where we've found that humans end up being pretty bad at being in the loop, or they become different. So we need to kind of have the training in place. And especially, one of the things I recently have been seeing is a lot of mental health chatbots, and some of these services that are coming out. So one of the examples is a tool that was talking to someone recently. This company has this tool for support for doing mental health counseling in high school students, because their business case is, we don't have, a lot of rural schools don't have enough resources to have counselors. This tool is cheaper, so we can put it in place, and we have these people who are sitting remotely, virtually monitoring the chat, so that if something goes wrong, they can intervene. But now this one person is monitoring 30, 40 different chats. Uh, I don't know if there's been no evaluation. Are they capable of doing it? Is it better than not having that? I don't know if it's better or worse, but we need those types of evaluations to make sure that the humans in the loop are actually improving the system rather than providing a checkbox. Um, okay, I'm gonna skip this. Ethics important, but not just the word and the conversations, but for me, a lot of the ethical choices that we make get embedded into code in these AI systems. And so we want to make sure that those are exposed, they are auditable, because they're technical decisions that are being made, but they're actually value decisions. They are ethical decisions. The success metric, right? If the metric was reduction in overall homelessness, you've just prioritized um, overall effectiveness over equity. If the metric was reduction in disparity between first time homeless and repeat homelessness, reduction in disparity between um, racial gaps in homelessness reduction, now you've kind of taken an ethical choice, a value choice, and made it into a technical choice that the system is optimizing for. And I think that's the piece that we need to focus more on. And all of this is really controlled through procurement, right? If you're not building your own system, you're often buying from vendors. The procurement process is often wrong and doesn't have all these things because you don't have the tools and the resources and the trainings. The people, the teams doing procurement don't have this training to do this well, and don't have the support and don't have the resources. So I think that part is the one that we need to get right. So I'm gonna just basically, I think this is kind of my last, actual content slide, which is how do we get started, right? How do we do this right? And this flow is not different than what you've been doing before with data, right? Which is for any project, define the outcomes. What, not outcomes that are kind of internal, but outcomes that are societal policy goals, right? What is the goal? Is it um, improved employment? Is it improved educational outcomes? Is it reduction in disparity in educational achievement or employment or economic development? Figure out what interventions you can change. What are the programs? What are the actions you can take? Figure out the data infrastructure. Um, co-design with all the different people involved, and then embed evaluation throughout, as opposed to kind of doing it at the very end. Do it in chunks, do it iteratively, and embedding kind of ethics and governance throughout. You can spend a lot more time on this, but I sort of go through. Um, okay, so those are kind of in my mind that of all the things we talked about, kind of the big takeaways, right? Is don't get distracted by accuracy and benchmark claims. Kind of think about outcomes. We need good data and we need good governance. Those are not optional. Those are kind of necessary conditions to even start doing this work. Um, Problem first and not AI first. That's easier sort of said than done today. And so maybe co-lead with both. And then because procurement is so important, um, developing a procurement process that's effective, that have templates for that, having resources to evaluate existing systems, and most important to me, asking for meaningful transparency from vendors. When you get something, they'll sort of tell you different types of transparency. They might even sort of say, here's the source code. You actually want meaningful transparency, because that's not just the source code. It's saying all of these ethical value choices that have been made in the system, these hundreds of them, tell me what those are. Tell me where they are hidden in the technical code. And I want to have them separate. I want to have policy conversations around those, and I will set them the way I want them to. I don't want to be embedded, hidden inside code in millions of lines. And that's the risk of having a lot of these coding tools auto generate things, because they'll hide them inside. And so you can tune them to sort of extract them out of it and say, put them in a different place so I can actually start talking about those in a meaningful way. And that's one way to kind of do that through an effective procurement process. Okay, I will stop. I know I've said a lot of words. Hopefully some of them were useful. I know I'm not there, but I'm happy to I don't think we have, if we have time, I'm happy to sort of answer questions now in that's going to be awkward format, but please email me if you have any questions, if you want to collaborate, if you want to work on any of these types of things. We do a lot of work with governments. And so email me if you want to talk more, or if you want to, feedback or talk through any of the things you're working on, you can use help with. And thank you. And sorry, I couldn't be there in person.